Nelson, you are remanded to the custody of those annoying robots on your satellite to watch a cinematic abomination from the 60s called Agent for Harm.
This time we watched Season 8, Episode 15, Agent for Harm.
Where, after a quick trip to the judo range, we save the world.
But first, some follow-up. Oh, Charlotte, we got a letter.
A letter? I love letters.
Yes, and this is a letter about Lawrence Welk, who we talked about last episode.
I love Lawrence Welk, but do I really actually... Now that I think about it, I listened to that episode and I was like, Chris, was I too enthusiastic about Lawrence Welk? I feel like I might have misrepresented myself to some of our listeners.
Well, here's what listener Emma has to say. Whenever I stayed over at my grandparents' as a kid, I was forced to watch Lawrence Welk reruns. They were the absolute worst. Once I was over there and was watching a VHS tape of Attack of the Eye Creatures that I had taped off Comedy Central. My grandmother heard Trace's Lawrence Welk impression and said, "See, they like Lawrence Welk." She did not get MST3K at all.
I have to say, I am not sure how the people who are a part of MST3K really feel about Lawrence Welk. I don't feel like they hate the phenomenon of Lawrence Welk as this like weird Midwest staple. But I don't know. Do you think that the Misties hate Lawrence Welk?
Well, this is sort of what I said back to Emma. I was like, Lawrence Welk's not to everybody's tastes. Sorry you had to go through that. No one should be forced to go through such trauma. But, there are ways of finding a way to enjoying it, even if, we were very enthusiastic. But it is sort of like if you're gonna have to watch it, here's how you enjoy it.
Yes. And there's a weird form of sincerity in it that I don't find when I'm watching. Like, there's a bunch of movies that are out right now, like The Polka King, and a couple of others that are talking about people who have Lawrence Welk-style bands in this Midwestern style thing. And they feel very ironic and tongue-in-cheek and insincere. And if nothing else, I admire the sincerity of something like Lawrence Welk. So something else I didn't mention that I wish I had, one of the really sweet things about Lawrence Welk watching in my household is that my father would watch it at home. And we would all feel tormented. But then he would immediately go to the phone and he would call his mom. And he would be like, "Hey, Mom, how was that episode? What did you think of that song? What did you think about the dance?" And it was this bonding moment for he and his mom. And, he grew up in a single-parent household in the 1950s and 60s in San Francisco. It wasn't easy. I think about it now and I get a little verklempt because it's just what a beautiful thing that he had between his mom.
He had a recap podcast.
There you go. My father was the original podcaster. I'm saying it right now. I'm going to go on tape.
Well, I pointed out to Emma that I don't know what Trace's feelings about Lawrence Welk are. So Trace, if you're listening, and I know you've listened to at least one episode of this show, please write in and tell us what your thoughts of Lawrence Welk are. Anyway, that was a bit more of Lawrence Welk. Thank you for writing in, Emma. We should also mention that there was a new episode of MST3K that we managed to watch together, Dr. Mordred.
Yes, I finally got into the Slack in time to be able to watch a new episode live. This hasn't happened for 30 years. I don't think I've watched an MST3K live for at least 30 years. So it was really wonderful to be able to do that with our fans in the Slack.
Yeah, and 30 years ago, there wasn't chatting with people you know around the world at the same time, so...
No, they had to just be in the room.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, I'm really enjoying that side of it as well. Dr. Mordred was a pretty fun episode, I thought. And the next one, excitingly, which is going to be a film called Demon Squad, is going to be the one with Joel.
And I thought they set up beautifully how they were bringing him back, because I was really curious about how they were going to make it work, that this host that left a really, really long time ago was somehow going to rejoin the satellite. Yeah, I thought they did a good job of making something plausible happen.
Yeah, Josh Weinstein as Dr. Earhart comes back. He was in some of the Netflix episodes, and he is told by Dr. Cabal, who apparently he's good friends with, to go and find one of the original hosts. And there's a good bit about, well, should it be Mike or Joel? And it's like, I don't know. What's the difference? It's very funny. But I think now we should start talking about today's episode, Agent for Harm. No, Agent for Harm. I was misreading that. Sorry.
This time we watch Season 8, Episode 15, Agent for Harm. A man in a cardigan means business. Everyone knows that. And no man means business more than Adam Chance, Agent for Harm. The dashing bits of gray in his hair please all the ladies as he saves the world from rising international tensions, biological weapons, and hot double agents. Sounds like an exciting riff on that legendary genre, the spy movie. Well, it is as exciting as his yellow cardigan. So not exciting at all. The movie opens to scientists escaping communist territory, and we know this because everyone has a terrible accent, so it must take place in a foreign land. This scientist, Dr. Stefanik, brings with him a meteorite with spores from outer space. He's able to defect to the U.S. in a stolen Grateful Dead van to a small coastal town near San Diego. The agents of H.A.R.M are there to protect him and his long-lost but recently discovered niece. Because when I'm fleeing the aggressive communism of the 60s, I totally trust the conventionally hot blonde lady who says she's the niece I haven't seen in 20 years. Isn't anyone besides me naturally suspicious? Even more suspicious, everyone around them keeps dying with oozy green pus face. So it's just plain disgusting. Fortunately, the H.A.R.M boss sends in Chance, Adam Chance, to solve everything. He brings an amazing amount of cardigans, like one, but he wears it all the time. And he brings karate from the judo range. And he has gadgets too, just like that other super spy. Adam threatens the scientist a lot and then flirts with the long-lost niece, who's a double agent. Duh. Dr. Stefanik lets Adam in on the secret biological weapon plan the other side has for the spores, and Adam knows he must act super slowly. People shoot each other with bullets. They shoot each other with tiny sausage guns that squirt out green goo that looks like bird poop. They electrocute each other. The scientist has a monkey. They set up elaborate traps. They mail letters. They slap each other. Adam fixes the TV. A car turns into a boat. Adam strangles a guy with a coat hanger. The dry cleaning van goes off a cliff. Prince flies a plane. Adam gets a flat tire. This all takes like 10 hours of film, but in the end, only Adam is left standing with bags and bags of spore sawdust that I don't think anyone has any idea what to do with, in the movie or in real life. Adam visits the pussy scientist in the morgue, because he died too, and leaves him a note. Then Adam has the not niece arrested, but only after more making out, because he's dedicated, you see, dedicated to that action-packed cardigan lifestyle. The end.
Meanwhile, on the satellite of love, it's the 90s. So Tom and Crow are being extreme about yoga and stamp collecting. And they encourage Mike to be extreme about, something. He settles on rice. But turns out Mike just can't get that extreme. Not even about rice. But then, with a flash, Mike is gone. He's been teleported to a strange void where everything is in black and white. Turns out he's been charged with the crime of destroying several planets. You might remember that's been a running gag throughout Season 8. Mike accidentally destroyed Bobo's homeworld, and then the Observer's homeworld, and then whatever that planet was where the Mads went camping. Well, now he's on trial for these crimes. He accidentally picks Bobo as a defense attorney and picks Pearl as a prosecutor. But the court goes into recess so Mike can watch the bad movie. During the first intermission, Crow bakes a cake with a not-so-hidden power saw to send to Mike to help him escape. But now it's time for opening statements. Turns out, Bobo's just a simple country lawyer, and he encourages everyone to get the giggles out of their system by repeating the word panties. Panties, 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 panties.
Panties, 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 panties.
The next intermission has video depositions from Tom, who treats it like a celebrity pack TV special, Crow, who curses a blue streak for some reason, and GPC, who simply and plainly states Mike's innocence, which causes the courtroom to gasp. GPC's testimony is, it seems, terrible for Mike's case. And after some more movie, Brain Guy gets on the witness stand to describe the day his planet was destroyed. He embellishes his account a little, detailing the fresh-baked pie he was delivering to the old Observer Center when his planet go boom. And Bobo seizes upon this, asking more and more details about that pie, until it's clear that Brain Guy, in fact, has no idea how to make a pie. What a fraud. And after the movie, Pearl brings Ortega up to the stand, and his incomprehensible testimony will surely be Mike's downfall, but then Bobo brings up his final witness, a little Amish boy, who says Mike is innocent. Pearl tries to destroy the Amish boy's credibility, but she fails, and then the judge gives his sentence, death, which he then commutes to 800 hours of community service, because Mike seems like basically a nice guy. The end. Okay, Charlotte, time for the big question. Did you enjoy this taste of Season 8?
Did I enjoy this taste of Season 8? I enjoyed the riffs. I thought they had some funny ones. I also thought they fell into some really unpleasant pitfalls inside of their riffs. In particular, something that really disappointed me is they just had an ongoing riff about Adam Chance's boss being drunk because he slurs some of his words. And maybe he is drunk. I don't know. But it was like every time that guy was on the screen, they had a drunk joke. And I only have so much tolerance for something like that. I don't find it funny. And that's on me. I totally get it, but I just did not enjoy that. And the other thing I didn't enjoy was they purposefully made the only real female character a baby woman and then just started making baby jokes when she was on the screen. And I couldn't tell what it was in the movie that might have inspired that at all. Maybe you picked up on it, Chris. It seemed just out of nowhere for me.
I think it was because she was a woman.
Oh, well, that's obvious. I can't believe I didn't get it. It must be my, infantile brain not picking it up.
Yeah, that was real unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. But I enjoyed that they made fun of this movie's complete lack of understanding of culture, because they were talking about karate from the Middle East and they had all of these ridiculous terms that are completely not okay. Skeet kendo and bring your Akito rifle. And wear your judo bikini. I mean, it's just like these people because karate does not come from the Middle East. And of course they say it like that as well because it's the 1960s and he's a secret agent. So it's just, so I thought some of the riffs were really great. I'm sorry that they fell into the let's make fun of drinking trap. And I'm sorry they ran into the let's make fun of women trap. But the ongoing Prince references, some of the let's list all the reasons why people are old and what old people are into. I loved those. Why do I love that they make fun of old people, but not women and not drunks? I don't know. But I enjoyed many of the riffs here. What did you think, Chris?
I agree. There was plenty of riffing I enjoyed. There were a few of the usual sci-fi era pitfalls that got on my nerves, like the ones that you described. I really enjoyed the Prince jokes. I thought that was one of the main highlights of the episode.
It totally was.
There's a character, one of the henchmen, who looks a bit like Prince, and they come up with so many fun Prince references throughout it, and it's just a treat. The other thing I liked was in the sketches, which were mostly fine, but they did a thing which they do every once in a while, which is that they made Professor Bobo smart and competent, while still a goofball who's obsessed with food and a few other things. And it just plays so much better. It's so much funnier.
Yes.
Bobo is intolerable in so many episodes, and he's so fun in this one.
I have to say, I've heard you on previous episodes talking about how annoying Bobo is as a character, and how it detracts from some of the comedy that's happening around it rather than enhances what's going on. And I didn't find that at all inside of this episode. I enjoyed Bobo doing his Andy Griffith impression, or his Matlock expression, or his Matlock impression inside of the courtroom and waving the hanky around and everything. So I found Bobo to be perfectly entertaining inside of this.
Yep. Well, soon enough we'll watch another one and he'll be back to normal.
Sure. Maybe I can argue with you about the merits of the dumb Bobo. Who knows?
I also want to talk about one scene where they do something which I have noted a few times as we've gone through, especially season 8, which is there's a scene where the bad guys are laying down this sort of pneumatic tripwire outside of their compound for our hero, Adam Chance, to drive over on his motorcycle, and then it's hooked up to some guns that are going to shoot him. And it's very clear and obvious what they're doing and why. And yet Crow is like, why are they plugging in the guns? Or some joke like that. And it's just like, are you not even watching? Like, that's obvious. And once again, they've said something, they've explained something, and you're pretending like they haven't.
Sure, but although, there's a follow-up comment from Tom, which is just like, wouldn't it have just been easier to just shoot him?
That I didn't have a problem with.
Sure, but if the comment is leading toward, what the heck are you doing? Wouldn't it be easier just to shoot him? That doesn't seem like a riff that's just making fun of maybe it is just making fun of the movie, but there it is.
Yeah, like if they had said, this is really complicated, why don't they just shoot him? That would have been fine. And it proves to be completely ineffective, of course. And
well, they didn't do a good job with the tripwire. It was just a really long rope that could be moved. What is that?
It did not make any sense.
No.
But, they did it in a hurry, so it's fine.
No, I watched that movie, Chris. It was not in a hurry. That was like 5 minutes of screen footage. It was not a hurry at all.
No, it isn't. Anyway, I just don't like it when they don't actually pay attention to the movie.
Fair enough.
This is a spy film, and we haven't done a spy film in ages. I think the last one we did was Operation 0007 back in episode 59, and maybe, I guess, Danger Death Ray back in episode 2 before that. As you probably know, I have never really seen a James Bond film.
I know this, but it still surprises me because they feel so ubiquitous.
That's why I haven't seen it, because, I try to avoid things that are ubiquitous, I guess.
Yep, but the whole point of things being ubiquitous is you can't avoid them. How have you managed this?
I have my mysterious ways. But even I know from the clips I've seen of James Bond films and, seeing it on in the background when I'm at someone's house or whatever, that the whole point of it is the elaborate travel and the spectacle of it all of which is missing from this. Even when we watched Danger Death Ray or Operation 0007, they had much more of that than we find in this episode.
Well, you have to have a bunch of car chases and things blowing up if you are not going to have a plot. I mean, it pretty much fills the time.
So yeah, this was a real disappointment. I guess part of that is because this is actually a pilot for a TV series, and you're not going to make a TV series with a James Bond style budget, even a knockoff James Bond style budget.
It seems like Mission Impossible did a perfectly fine job of doing that, as did the Avengers. I mean, there's some shows out there that do a perfectly fine job of either having plot or big action sequences, and they're able to do both on TV. This seems really, really low budget.
Okay. I also can't imagine what the second episode would have been about.
I mean, I guess he would have been sent somewhere else to solve some other crime.
Yeah, I guess so. I should also say, do you know what H.A.R.M stands for?
Hot and ready man. That's where they seem to settle.
That's the riff they come up with. You can see it on the map at the end of the movie. It stands for Human Etiological, spelt the British way for some reason, Relations Machine, which is stupid.
Oh, yeah.
But you know what etiology is, right?
You're going to have to refresh my memory. I feel like I haven't taken an SAT course since I was in high school.
So etiology is sort of why are things the way they are? And usually it's used in things like medicine as to why do diseases happen? What's the etiology of the disease? Why did this disease occur in this population?
Oh.
It also has philosophy meanings and things like that. But
sure.
But I think in this case they're talking about it from a disease perspective because we're talking about the weird spores from outer space that melt people's faces.
So they're specifically super agents that are sent to control pandemics and prevent pandemics?
That seems like it, but they're not really very specific about it.
Well, I mean, I feel like we could have used these agents at some point in time, right? It seems like in the recent past, there could have been some pretty awesome agents on the ground preventing some pandemics. I don't know. Just saying.
Yeah. I've gotten off track. What was your take on James Bond films? Have you seen a ton of them?
I feel like I have seen a lot of James Bond movies, and I have certainly participated in the who's your favorite James Bond argument.
George Lazenby is your answer.
Oh, obviously. Tim Dalton. No, just kidding. I think in the past I would have said Sean Connery because the conversation at the time was very much about like that, who's the original, right? And everybody starts, I think, out in their development as a person as somewhat of an originalist, right? And then we start advancing in our thoughts and we start taking in different perspectives and we can start thinking about different kinds of things that could come into the conversation and increase the understanding of the world that's being displayed inside of a movie. And I have to admit that I haven't seen any of the Daniel Craig, James Bond movies, but it seems like action movies in general have been trending towards having more realistic fights where people actually get hurt and they don't just stand up and start walking away like nothing's wrong. You know, people aren't bleeding out pints and pints and pints of blood, but still able to run down the block after you somehow. So like there feels like action movies in general are moving towards some amount of realism, which was absolutely never there inside of early James Bond movies. I always enjoyed Roger Moore in the 80s, but I think that's probably because like I was a kid in the 80s watching the James Bond movies. And I mean, there's just something titillating about the name of the movie Octopussy.
Yeah, well, I think that might have been intentional.
Yeah, there is always that idea. I don't know. And it seems like his villains over time have changed from being, you know, communism to being, oh, I'm thinking of Tomorrow Never Dies. And that's like a James Bond movie where the villain is really an ultra millionaire inside of the communications field who wants to take over the world and be like the guy who's in charge of everything. And I mean, how old is that movie now? That movie's at least 20 years old. And how relevant is it still to today for what our mega millionaires and billionaires are looking towards in their lives? So in some ways, James Bond is calling out these societal trends, and I guess I appreciate that, but there's also a lot of problems in the James Bond movies. You know, his sexual exploits being one of them.
I always got the sense that was sort of part of the appeal.
I guess, but in an age where safe sex and those kinds of conversations are something that are so important to our society at large, for James Bond to be a character that Pierce Brosnan is going to say, well, no, James Bond would never use a condom. Why would he use a condom? That's not very spy-like. And it's like, you know what? Those aren't the messages that we need out there right now. Why can't James Bond evolve with the conversations that are happening at the time? Why can't he? There's no reason why he can't. It can still be like sexy and riveting, and it could still be drawing in audiences, and he can still be representing some of the better things that are happening inside of our social conversations. And I find that James Bond tends to be a little behind that curve.
I think the thing with James Bond and the condom thing is that he knows that if he dies, he's a Time Lord, right? So he'll just come back in a new body and it's fine.
Yeah, but then he might come back as a woman, and then what will the men of this world do?
We'll find out. You're not really selling me on breaking my my streak and actually watching a James Bond movie.
No, I feel like the James Bond spoofs are going to be so much more entertaining. I mean, I am not going to make the case that Agent for Harm is the movie that's going to make you want to watch James Bond movies because it's such a good spoof. But I have to say, if you go back to like the beautiful, beautiful movie of In Like Flint.
Okay.
That might be my favorite ridiculous spy movie spoof ever. And that might just be because James Coburn speaks to dolphins speaks to dolphins in dolphin language in the pool on his penthouse suite at the top of a building in, I don't know, some American city that he lives in. Also, women take over NASA and they send women to space. It was the 60s. I'm just saying the first woman's spacewalk happened in the movie In Like Flint. It didn't, it's not a real spacewalk, but it was dreamed of a really long time ago.
First woman's spacewalk, wasn't that?
Like in the recent past.
Oh, it was in the 80s.
First all-woman spacewalk.
Oh, that was quite recent.
Yeah, all-woman spacewalk. In Like Flint, that movie is from the 60s. The fashion in it is ridiculous. Much like the bikinis that the not niece is wearing inside of Agent for Harm. I mean, it's the same wardrobe. So, Agent for Harm is bringing in things from a good spoof. It's just not actually a good spoof of a spy movie itself.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13 oozy green bubbly bits about today's experiment, Agent for Harm. Go, Chris, go!
There's not a whole heck of a lot to say about that cast and crew of this film, but those with a keen eye might have noticed the cinematographic stylings of Ted V. Michaels. Yes, Ted V. Michaels, director of Girl in Gold Boots and cinematographer on Catalina Caper.
Barbara Boucher plays Ava Vestock, the niece who turns out to be a commie spy. She's had a long career in English language and Italian films, including playing Miss Moneypenny in Casino Royale.
And Rafael Campos, who played our Prince lookalike Luis, was in Blackboard Jungle and V, but was also in Ted V. Michaels' The Astro Zombies, which our Fiasco family friends discussed in one of their podcasts. Check it out, link in the show notes. And he was briefly married to jazz legend Dinah Washington? Dang. But he also had an uncredited appearance in Girl in Gold Boots, so oh well.
As Dr. Stefanik throws a grenade at the beginning of the film, Crow quips,
"Tonight on Michael Collins, P.I."
This is not Michael Collins the astronaut, who we discussed in our episode on Moon 02, nor is it Michael Collins, the host of Megaphonic podcast This Is Your Mixtape. No, this time it's the Irish revolutionary who, I guess he also threw a grenade or two in his day. Probably.
The movie's title cards are all in lowercase, leading Tom to quip,
Titles by E.E. Cummings and Katie Lang.
The poet E.E. Cummings and the singer Katie Lang are both known for writing their names entirely in lowercase letters. Except this is kind of an urban legend about E.E. Cummings. Cummings' poetry was often all in lowercase, but he used capital letters in his name like a normie.
There's a slightly dramatic establishing shot of Dr. Stefanik's beachside home, and Mike quips,
Xanadu, stately home of Charles Foster Manson.
Dr. Stefanik's house feels a bit closer in spirit to Charles Manson's Spawn Ranch than to Charles Foster Kane's mansion in Citizen Kane.
And a few minutes later, Adam Chance's boss is on the phone asking about someone's name, which he repeats.
What was his assistant's name, please?
That drunk soul.
Harry Manson.
Shirley's brother, isn't he?
Shirley Manson is the lead singer of Garbage. You know, the band that's only happy when it rains? Well, Garbage also got to record a Bond theme, The World Is Not Enough. Oh, and I guess I should add, no relation to Charles.
Dr. Stefanik goes to comfort his niece and says,
My poor Ava.
I'm sorry Green Acres was cancelled.
Ava Gabor played the glamorous foreign urbanite living the rural American farm life in 1960s sitcom Green Acres. Green Acres has come up a few times on this show. Another of its regulars, Pat Buttram, was in Angel's Revenge, and Green Acres' weird soundtrack inspired the Mads' invention of the pork arena in Iga.
Bobo repeats the word panties in the courtroom to let everyone get their giggles out.
Panties, panties, panties. Panties, panties.
This is a reference to a somewhat similar scene in the 1950s courtroom drama Anatomy of a Murder, where the male judge and the male lawyers can't think of a serious word for panties. The judge lets everyone have a chance to laugh at the word panties before returning to the serious case of murder and alleged rape. Bobo, of course, says the word panties a few more times than may have been strictly necessary.
As the baddie puts a magnifying glass up to his eye, Crow quips,
Harry carries glasses.
Harry Carey was a baseball announcer who did the play-by-play for several teams over 50 years in the business. He's credited with being the first to sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" during the 7th inning stretch. Oh, and he had big, chunky glasses.
Some of the bad guys' henchmen are very blonde and have surfer cuts, and one of them inspires Mike to ask,
Jan or Dean?
Jan and Dean were a duo that competed with the Beach Boys in the California surf rock sound. In fact, Jan and Dean got a surf song to the top of the charts first with 1963's Surf City. Yeah, no, that Surf City USA song about a place where there's two girls for every boy isn't a Beach Boys song, except that Beach Boy Brian Wilson wrote it.
Jan and Dean also recorded The Little Old Lady from Pasadena, as well as one of many, many, many songs about teens dying that got popular in the early 60s. Dead Man's Curve is about a singer who has a drag race that ends in a fatal crash. A few years after the song was a hit, Jan Berry, who put the Jan in Jan and Dean, would nearly die in a real-life car crash near the curve described in the song.
And finally, this is the first episode where GPC is voiced by Patrick Brancic. Brancic, whose main job on MST3K was making props, was last seen in the episode on Jack Frost, playing Yakov Smirnoff, which is kind of the perfect role to have before taking on GPC.
And that's time!
As I mentioned earlier, one of the great things about this episode is how they treat Rafael Campos, Luis, who looks a lot like Prince, and so they make a lot of Prince jokes.
They do. It's really fantastic. And I think part of it is that he's wearing sunglasses like the entire time. Does he ever take those sunglasses off? I didn't notice him take them off.
I don't think so. Maybe he does a little bit at one point, but yeah, it's great. He's just this little guy who's very sharply dressed, and he's wearing sunglasses, and he's got like Prince's hair. I mean, Prince's hair changed a lot over his career, but like when it was a shorter cut, it was very correct. It was a very correct call in terms of who he looks like.
Oh, no question.
And of course, Prince is one of the other fantastic things to come out of Minnesota, in addition to MST3K.
I am so glad that there were so many references to Prince inside of this. I even appreciated that even though at one point in time, Mike turns to Crow and Mike is like, that's enough with the Prince references. Crow keeps going. There is no stopping those Prince references. No.
Yeah, they don't stop. Why would you? Prince wouldn't stop.
He absolutely would not.
What's your take on Prince? What's your relationship with the music of Prince?
Well, I mean, I am a child of the 80s, so of course I grew up with some of the songs that they're referencing, like Raspberry Beret. And I love the song Cream. That's a really good Prince song, although, probably more 90s than it is 80s. And, I think at the turn of the century, going from 1999 into 2000, that was, of course, the song that was on in every household of every person I know. So Prince is, his songs are one of those things where it's just, I'm sure they played them at my prom. I'm sure they played them at my prom. I'm sure they were played in my car every time I was driving somewhere. And I'm always pleased when I hear a Prince song. You and I have some history with Prince. Do you remember when we used to be in a band together and we were on tour together and we were driving through Nevada and I got my first speeding ticket ever?
I do remember that. Were we listening to Prince at the time? I forgot that part of the story.
We were listening to Prince at the time. We were singing Prince at the top of our lungs, driving entirely too fast on a deserted road in Nevada. And I totally got pulled over. It was totally warranted, but it was worth it. It was a great moment.
I forgot that part of the story. Wow. Yeah. So similarly, I grew up with Prince because, again, child of the 80s, and it was very hard to avoid him, and he was fabulous. Prince is one of those musicians where, he's clearly a genius and is fantastic, and yet I also don't know him as well as I probably should. I really know certain parts of his timeline. I know Purple Rain and some of the other singles around that. I don't even know Sign of the Times that well.
Yeah. But I think that he as an artist kept a lot of his private life really private. I mean, until like, I understand there, if I'm remembering correctly, there was something horrible that happened in his timeline. Like he lost a child or something.
Yes,
and it was horrific. It was horrific. And that became big news. But until then, like there was so much of his private life that he had actually been able to keep out of so much of the press, which amazes me, because how did that happen in the 80s and the 90s? A superstar of that caliber not having the kind of very public life that like Madonna had or that Michael Jackson had. Here's Prince, every much the same like superstar status, and he's able to have so much more of a private life. I think it's amazing that he was able to do so.
Yeah. And I was talking about like knowing more about him as a musician. Like I don't know his catalog that well, but I've been thinking, getting ready for the show, about some of my Prince memories.
Aw, what's your favorite Prince memory?
Well, I've got a few. One of them is Purple Rain, the movie, which is brilliant as I recall. I debated watching it again. I've been meaning to rewatch it for a little while now, and I just remember it being fantastic. Also, it's personally a favorite because I don't know if you remember this because you weren't there for it, but I was in Purple Rain.
No, you weren't. Really?
No, well, one time, me and some friends of ours went up to Seattle to visit some other friends of ours. And when we got there, our friends said, "Hey, we were thinking about filming Purple Rain tonight. Do you want to do that?" And so we
were thinking about filming Purple Rain tonight. This is what they greet you with. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was amazing. It's such a good way to greet people. I encourage everyone to do it. And they had a copy of the VHS box. And so we allowed ourselves to remember what we could remember of the film and look at the back of the box for clues as to what goes on in the film and what some of the key scenes were. And then as best we could, we recreated it with like a really, this was like 2003-ish. So like terrible resolution, point and click cameras and the little videos that they could make. Mm-hmm. And we made a silent film out of it because of course the important thing about Purple Rain is that it needs to be a silent film.
Yes, of course, obviously.
I did a lot of the directing work along with somebody else. We were sort of co-directing, I suppose. And then later on, I did an edit of it. I am also in the movie because I played a member of the Morris Day and the Time. I was part of the Time. I played trombone. It was great.
That is fantastic. That is fantastic. I was going to ask if you were, his arch rival in love who got to sing Jungle Love.
Yeah, no, I was part of the band. And,
that makes sense too.
So much of the footage was shot outside in the dark, and it's you can't see anything. I'm not releasing it to the public. It's incomprehensible, but I recommend everybody go out and make their own version of Purple Rain just based on whatever you can find and like the one paragraph description of the movie.
That sounds phenomenal. It sounds like the best thing to do with friends on a Saturday night.
It was so much fun. So that happened. And also go see the movie if you haven't. It's a great movie. And a great album, of course.
Yes.
Other things that I remember, I was thinking about, like, I was feeling a bit bad because some of the other things that I remember aren't as Prince-centric. And I guess things that like a lot of people think about because, again, I'm not a super fan. But you remember the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing that happened in 2004?
You're going a little obscure for me this time, Chris. What did happen in 2004?
I'm going to have to send you some links. In 2004, Prince was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
It took that long?
Yeah, although there's rules. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, sure.
But the other person who was inducted that year was George Harrison as a solo artist.
Oh.
And of course, George Harrison had died a few years earlier. So during the concert, they get a bunch of people together to play While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Mm-hmm. Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne from the Traveling Wilburys are doing the vocals. Steve Winwood is there. George's son's there. And, they're doing this performance. And it's all very fine. It's by the books. Jeff Lynne is doing great on the harmonies. And then off in the corner in the shadows, you don't even see him when you're watching the video of it. Prince is there wearing like a fabulous red hat. And when it comes time for the big ending solo, he just slides out and he plays the best 3-minute guitar solo ever.
I think I do remember this now that you're describing it. I remember it being just mind-blowing. Mind-blowing.
It's so good. Apparently, Prince was a very last-minute addition that the rest of the band were sort of told about, not given a choice about. I'm sure they didn't mind.
I hope they didn't mind. My goodness.
And when they did some rehearsals, Prince just like dialed it way back. He went through the motions.
Sure.
He did not let anyone know what was coming. And then he just comes out there and blows everybody's minds. It is very much like what I think of with Prince, right? He's got this moment where he can make a very public statement and he just blows through everybody's expectations of what's going to happen. He comes on with full confidence and nails it, and it's just astonishing. So the other thing that I'm thinking about, and it's sort of along the same lines, is his Super Bowl halftime show.
I do not recall Prince doing a Super Bowl halftime show, but of course he did. Everyone has done a Super Bowl halftime show. Wow. What year was it?
It was 2007, Super Bowl 41. This was a few years after the Justin Timberlake things. They spent a few years bringing in like Paul McCartney and some really safe people to do it. And then they think, okay, let's do Prince. Let's make it interesting again.
Yeah, Prince is safe.
I mean, he was more safe then. Like he'd found God basically, and he'd really toned down the most sexy, most dirty parts of his show. But, he was still Prince. Like, he's still going to do a thing. And of course, Prince is not going to let you know ahead of time what's going to happen. He's going to deliver the goods, but he's not going to really clue you in on it. All that said, the Super Bowl halftime show is remarkable in particular because for the first time in Super Bowl history, it rained. And it not only rained, it downpoured.
Wow.
To the point where, like, the producers and everything were terrified because, you've got this slick stage and you've got dancers on it and you've got electrical equipment and you've got all this stuff going on.
No, that's a nightmare.
And apparently Prince was also a bit worried about it for a while. But, like, when it was time to go on, one of the producers sort of checked in and is Prince okay? And apparently Prince said, can they make it rain harder? And he went out and he just crushed it. It was astonishing. And like, you watch the footage, it's raining everywhere. The rain is creating this wonderful effect on the camera. So it's really beautiful. He's playing this really interesting set. He does 8 songs basically, and half of them are covers.
Wow.
He opens with We Will Rock You.
Oh my gosh.
He does Proud Mary. He does All Along the Watchtower in the sort of Hendrix style. And then he does a Foo Fighters cover of Best of You, which was one of the recent hits at that point. Yeah.
Huh.
And he ends, of course, with Purple Rain, which, of course he's going to, but of course it's a magnificent in this place when the rain is coming down, when like the marching bands have come out, when the fans have come out to dance. It's just, he's made it through this torrential rain. He looks like he's been lightly misted, even though there's massive puddles on the floor. He's just magic. Okay.
He is magic. Oh my
it's such a good performance. It's such an astonishing moment. It's absolutely wild. There's some really interesting behind the scenes oral histories that I'll link to, as well as linking to all the performances, which if you haven't seen it, go see it. It's wild.
I love Prince. He is one sexy MF. This episode, Chris, has 2 of my favorite things inside of it.
Uh-huh.
And I know they're your favorite things too. One of those things is pie.
I do love pies.
Mm-hmm. And the other one of those things is palindromes.
Well, okay, there's one palindrome.
Isn't that enough? Isn't that enough on this show to be able to talk about? There's one palindrome. It's true.
It absolutely is. Especially because, as some of our listeners know, if they're Patreon supporters and have listened to some of the bonus bits, that when we were first setting up and getting ready to put out this show, in order to test out the equipment, we did a little episode of a fake podcast called Pie Palindrome Pie, in which we talked about They Might Be Giants and pie.
Both wonderful things.
Because I Palindrome Pie is a They Might Be Giants song.
Yeah. It is true. The palindrome that shows up in the movie is when Adam Chance is introducing himself and they riff.
Madam, I'm Adam.
And I was like, oh, palindrome.
Yeah. I assume most of our listeners know that a palindrome is a word or phrase that reads the same forwards and backwards. So, Madam, I'm Adam. If you put the letters backwards, it still says, Madam, I'm Adam.
Yes. You do have to change the punctuation around. Fortunately, punctuation is not a rule when it comes to palindromes. It's just the letters.
Do you have any favorite palindromes?
Well, recently, one of my favorites has been a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. And that's mostly because my father finally got to go on his bucket list vacation with my mom on a cruise through the actual Panama Canal. And it's something he'd been looking forward to for so much of his life. So a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. What's one of your favorites?
I love a taco cat, of course.
Yes.
And what else? I don't know. Damn it, I'm mad. That's a good one.
I think that one of the very first ones that I ever saw was Race Car. Right, like second grade, third grade or something. I think Race Car was one of the very first ones that people were like, that's a palindrome. You can read it backward and forward. And then, of course, there's the more boring ones like Dad and Mom and Bob.
Bob is good.
It's a name that means Robert.
Yeah, no, there's a beloved song by a band called Ed's Redeeming Qualities. Beloved by like 4 people, but I think we're both among them.
Sure, yes.
And it's all about how Bob is a sad name to have. That's their opinion, not ours.
Yes.
And it's a name that means Robert, goes the chorus. It's a name that you have. If you put the letters backwards, it still spells Bob. There's no getting away from it.
No. And they have such an excellent sad tone when they say that too. You put the letters backwards, it still spells Bob.
So the longest palindromic word in the Oxford English Dictionary
I knew you'd look this up.
is tete-a-tete, which is the sound of someone knocking on a door, taken from James Joyce's Ulysses.
Oh, what a coincidence.
Which I just read and I'm talking about on my other podcast, so link in the show notes for that.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad that we got to shout out the spouter inside of this episode. It's one of my favorite podcasts on the Megaphonic Network.
All right. Yes, it's very nice. Go listen to it if you like books. Speaking of books, a few people have written longer palindromes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Longer palindromes, but that was the longest single word palindrome. So you're talking about palindrome phrases now.
So I'm talking about novels that are palindromic.
No.
The Wikipedia lists 2 of them, neither of which is easy to access physical copies of. There's one called Satire, Veritas, by David Stevens from 1980, which is said to be 58,000 plus letters, and a book called Dr. Awkward and Olsen in Oslo by Lawrence Levine from 1986, which is apparently just under 32,000 words. These books seem to actually exist, but they were self-published and in very limited quantities, and it's very hard to get your hands on them.
It seems like a spectacular feat even to be able to plan out something like that. I mean, writing a novel is already this amazing thing. I know you have participated in the November, write a novel in a month thing.
Yeah, I've never succeeded at that, but yes.
But you've participated and and I'm sure so many of our listeners know as well, how difficult it is just to even structure something as a novel. And then to add into that a huge, huge element of having to have the second half of the book be a mirror image of the first half of the book and still make logical sense. I don't even know how you plan something like that out. My hat's off to anybody who can write a novel, let alone.
Yeah, exactly. I will say making logical sense is a bit generous for how these books are. One that is much more easy to get access to is a book by Nick Montfort and William Gillespie called 2002. It's a palindrome of 2002 words that was published on February 20th, 2002. And I'll read you the first paragraph, I guess. 2002 demands lore, aside Roman era non-idle. Gorilla muse we call rig. Yo, brag us an ode tale. So it vaguely sounds like a bit of a opening of the Odyssey type call to the muses or something. It ends, crass algebra, eyes pale, bob teams, red arrow elated on a sugar. Boy, girl, lace. We sum all, ire, ugly, din. 1 year enamored is Arrow LSD named 2002. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, is my point.
No, I suppose it doesn't.
But it kind of makes a little bit of sense to the whole thing. And it is only 2,000 words. So I don't know. Go check that out. One of my favorite writers, Georges Perec, a French writer, wrote a palindrome in French, which is 1,265 words. But that's in French, and it's just as incomprehensible as this English thing is, so I have no idea what's going on in it. The longest sort of readable one that I know of is one that apparently the comedian Dimitri Martin wrote while he was in college, I think, in 1993, for a fractal geometry class.
Oh. Well, look at that. Look at us being math nerds again, Chris. What is that?
This one is a bit more readable, but also many of the lines are themselves palindromes, which does help a bit. But anyway, there'll be a link in the show notes for that as well. And then, of course, you have things like Weird Al Yankovic's song Bob, and They Might Be Giants' I, Palindrome I, which is not actually full of palindromes. It's full of word palindromes where the words get reversed backwards and forwards.
Yes. And, entertaining music.
Yeah. Now, that's the palindrome side of things, unless you had something else you wanted to add.
I mean, I'm a nut for a jar of tuna.
That's good. That's good. Now, are you a nut for pie?
I'm a nut for so many pie.
Okay. First off, I really appreciate it. This was my first time seeing this episode, and I knew exactly where the trick was because I have made many a pie. And while I don't make pies with lard, like Brain Guy allegedly does, I know that if you're making a pie, you would not add warm tap water to it.
No, I totally flagged on that too. I was like, oh, good, I know enough about baking to get this joke.
Exactly. I saw that one coming. I felt very clever. It was a really good moment in the show.
Wasn't it?
But he lists off all the different pies he's tried, and some of them are sort of familiar. Key lime, I imagine.
Yes.
You've had mince pies and so forth.
I've heard of mince pies, but I don't know as I've ever actually had one.
No?
I don't think so.
We used to have mince pies around Christmas times in my house, and you have spent Christmas at my parents' house.
Yeah, but I don't think that I ever had mince pie.
Oh, all right. Well, it's very nice if you like a not-so-sweet pie, which I do.
I usually do. I'm surprised I haven't tried it. Anyway, you were talking about other pies that Bobo brings up.
Yeah, there's black bottom pie, which I'd never heard of.
I've never heard of that either. What's black bottom pie?
It's a southern pie with you get like a layer of chocolate pastry cream or chocolate pudding or ganache or something like that. And then you top it with either like whipped cream or meringue.
Oh, that just sounds like a chocolate pie, like with mousse, right?
Yeah, it's just got a very thin layer of chocolate pie at the bottom.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard it called black bottom, but that's all right. Chocolate mousse is good, and in pie form, I'll take it. That sounds good.
Yeah. There's shoe fly pie.
Which I've never had.
What?
I know, right?
I've made many a shoe fly pie, and I was making it still when we lived in the same city, but it was not when we were living together. I started my pie baking after we stopped being roommates. Shoe fly pie is like a molasses crumb cake originally.
Oh, yeah, that wouldn't be for me. That's too sweet.
It is pretty sweet, although if you use sort of darker molasses, it can take on just that interesting dark molasses flavor. It's also a very easy pie to have the ingredients for, assuming you keep molasses around the house. It doesn't require eggs. It doesn't require all sorts of things. It's just a very basic, you got these ingredients, go for it.
Yeah, throw it in the oven. Pie.
And apparently it was originally a breakfast food, which sounds wild, but I guess it would, go with coffee.
Sure, like coffee cake, crumb cake.
Exactly. But it is sweeter and stickier than that. I don't know.
I tend to avoid the really super sweet pies. Like pecan pie's never been my favorite because it just runs too sweet for me.
No, I agree. And he mentions pecan pies, which is another southern dish, so it's appropriate. Do you know why pecan pies got popular?
I don't.
Basically, H.A.R.M corn syrup, which was in my cupboard growing up.
I think I have one in my cupboard right now.
Yeah. They realized that pecan pie is a good use for H.A.R.M corn syrup, and so they marketed the heck out of it, and it got real popular. So that's good, I guess. It is way too sweet for my needs. Even with bitter pecans, it doesn't cut it enough.
I prefer my fruit pies, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and he mentions fruit pies, which are very good. One of the other ones that I want to pull out is he mentions black chestnut pie.
Yep, not one that I'm familiar with. Have you ever had it?
No. Here's the thing. Chestnut pie is a thing that exists.
Well, that makes sense. If there's pecan pie, why wouldn't there be chestnut pie?
Yes, and in fact, chestnut pie is much older. It is a southern U.S. pie, but it was also a popular pie in Italy back in the 1600s, I believe. And it's one of those pies that can be made either savory or sweet. So you can have a chestnut and mushroom and gravy type pie, or you can make it into a pecan style pie.
That sounds so good.
Well, you should make it. There's recipes available online.
Do you think we'll put a link in the show notes?
Yeah, but I haven't tried any of those recipes.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
If you do that by the time this episode comes out, then we'll put one in that you
Fair
recommend. But I could not find any evidence of a black chestnut pie.
Huh.
Black chestnuts aren't a thing. Black chestnut pie doesn't seem to be a thing. I don't know what's going on with that. Maybe I just misheard it.
Maybe.
Listeners, if you know what's going on, feel free to write in. I would love it because I like pie. And I would love to know more about the world of pies.
Well, Chris, I think we've said almost everything we can about this super spy agency from H.A.R.M that's out to save us from so many pandemics. Do you have a final factoid for us?
I suppose I can dig something up. At one point early in the film, there is a kind of bald man with a goatee and a beret, and they make a joke about him looking like Shel Silverstein.
Damn you, Shel Silverstein!
Yes, because every bald man with a goatee and dark hair goatee specifically must be Shel Silverstein.
Indeed, we had similar jokes about East Eddie.
Yes. Oh, that mother crabber.
That mother crabber of our hearts back in Beyond Atlantis. So I just thought we should at least acknowledge it because it's come up twice. And like Shel Silverstein, what a weirdo.
I know. I have to say, like, okay, so I've read The Giving Tree, and I think I sob every single time, and it's not warranted, but I sob every time that I read this book. And then I turn to the back cover where they have a full page printout of his picture. And it's a little disturbing. It's such a weird juxtaposition, what he looks like versus this hugely weird, sentimental book that he's written, right? So it's
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yeah, when you find out more about him, like, you know, that he wrote a lot of stuff for Playboy.
Sure, but who didn't in the 70s and the 80s?
He wrote an adult-oriented alphabet book, as the Wikipedia describes it, called Uncle Shelby's ABZ book.
Sure, but who didn't in the 70s and the 80s?
He wrote the song A Boy Named Sue.
Wow.
A bunch of other songs performed by the Irish Rovers and Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show and so forth. Like, he had a weird career.
Yeah, and I think he's probably most known for the kids' books, because I have several of them, right? Where the Sidewalk Ends, as well as a copy of The Giving Tree. When I had a kid and we asked for books, there were many Shel Silversteins that came to our home to build our children's library out of.
Yeah. And, you know, I also grew up with them, and we had a light in the attic, and I don't know if we had Where the Sidewalk Ends. I don't know if we had The Giving Tree. I think I encountered that later, which thank goodness, because that nobody should have to read that book. They don't know what they're getting into. It is an abusive book.
It kind of is, yeah.
Stop. Don't cry. Don't cry. Don't cry.
The expectations of men are just too great for all of us, Chris.
Oh, dear. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to share your favorite Prince lyric, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our newest supporter, Sean. Thank you, Sean. For as little as $1 an episode, you can be like Sean and help us research and record this show. And you can join us in a friendly Slack where we all hang out and live stream our reactions to new episodes. And you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And of course, if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/114.
Chris, I guess it's time for us to start looking forward to our next episode. What are we going to be watching next?
Ooh, I am excited about this one. The next episode we're going to do is another season 13 episode. It's one that hasn't been released yet at time of recording. We're going to be looking at season 13, episode 6, Demon Squad, and the return of Joel Hodgson.
Oh my God, I think that might make me cry more than The Giving Tree.
It might. Yeah, you know, in the trailer, you can see they've recreated the Comedy Central era set to be in his background. But until then,
Action pants! My pants are up for the challenge.
Oh, so you get the new map channel. I would love to have the map channel. I would actually watch TV for that. Anyways, take it away, Theme Squad.
And I was like,